Hello and welcome to Lovely English Stories. Thank you for stopping by. This story is written for intermediate English learners. Ready? Let's get started. B1, B2 English Story. A Different Life. Josie was fed up with her friends, if truth be told. They were narrow-minded and stuck in the same routines they'd had for years. She wasn't like them. She'd always felt different. She never wanted to follow the ideals they had set for themselves. She wasn't interested in pursuing a successful career, having kids, or meeting a so-called perfect husband who would no doubt cheat on her further down the line. She wanted a different kind of life to them. Josie often saw married couples as lonely figures, trapped together in their, on the surface, picture-perfect lives. Sure, they have the house and the car and the exquisite holidays, but do they have the love, the passion, and the excitement anymore? Josie always knew she was an anomaly in the small town in which she grew up. She had no desire to stay, and yet always found herself back there after she'd finished one of her whirlwind adventures. Every time she came back, she hated it that little bit more. Of course, it had its pros. The people were friendly, the pubs were good, her family were close, and she could meet up with some of her more open-minded friends and discuss in-depth topics at length. But then she'd meet up with her old friends who, in all honesty, she had grown apart from, but they all clung to this sense that they had something in common. The reality was that Josie didn't have anything in common with them. She went to their lunches and often sat there daydreaming as they talked about their radiators, their jobs, their children's sleeping patterns, and their pension pots. It was soul-destroying for her. There was nothing wrong with their way of life, of course. What bothered Josie was that they always tried to project their lives onto her, as though the way she chose to live was offensive to them. They couldn't understand why she wasted her time volunteering, travelling, or taking courses and learning languages. They certainly couldn't understand why she hadn't made her first step onto the property ladder yet. It was exhausting. Party after party and lunch after lunch, she was bombarded with the same questions. "Are you dating anyone yet?" And, "I don't know how you cope being back at your parents'. Don't you want to buy?" And the dreaded, "Why don't you just get on the dating apps?" Josie had to stifle her eyes from rolling. It was infuriating. Why couldn't they see that she just wasn't like them? She didn't question why they'd paid £4,000 for a new sofa, why they'd decided to go all-inclusive to Tenerife, or why they'd just got another new car on finance. Everyone made their own decisions, and she wished they would just accept the way she wanted to live. Josie was a free spirit. Since being a child, she has always wanted to be out in the world exploring and learning new things. Her motto to live by was that variety is the spice of life. You never learn anything new if you keep doing the same old stuff. As a result, Josie could speak 3 languages. She travelled to over 30 countries, and she had worked in various jobs. Her diaries were full of memories of exciting experiences that her friends from her hometown weren't interested in the slightest. It made her feel sad. One day, after visiting some friends for brunch, Josie got back to her desk and signed into work for the day. She was working as a language teacher online. She loved helping her students and interacting with people from different cultures. The student she had a lesson with was from Spain. She lived in the mountains and didn't have access to an English school where she lived. Josie had a light bulb moment. What if she could go there and teach these people? Everyone deserved the right to an education after all. Her draining morning listening to her friends reel off their latest financed purchases made her reassess her life. She had managed to save some money while being back at her parents' and working online during the lockdown. She decided to look into a working visa for Spain, living costs, and more. Josie could speak intermediate Spanish. She got a B in Spanish at GCSE and had spent a semester at university in a small town south of Madrid. She tried to keep up her Spanish skills as much as she could, often by teaching Spanish people English or by taking part in English to Spanish tandems. Josie had lived and worked as an English teacher in Germany, Thailand, Vietnam, and London. In between contracts, she would go back to her hometown and live in her parents' spare room. This was where she currently found herself. She knew it was always just an intermission, but for some reason, whenever she came back, her friends thought she would stay there and work hard to try and have a life like theirs. Josie shook her head in disdain at the thought. She often wondered why she kept in touch with them. They weren't bad people, but they had all changed so much since school. They kept in touch purely to remember the good old times. But the good old times had gone over 20 years ago. Was it time for them all to move on? Josie spent a few weeks looking into teaching opportunities in Spain. She managed to secure 2 interviews. She was nervous, but ready for her next adventure. One interview went terribly. The interviewer decided to test Josie's Spanish skills. She froze on the spot and couldn't remember a thing. Then she fumbled her way through her presentation and completely fluffed all her answers. Her second interview went much better. She took a couple of Spanish lessons beforehand, just in case they decided to switch languages mid-interview. She needn't have worried. The interviewer was kind and generous, and they spoke at length about teaching English, teacher concerns, and how to enthuse and inspire students. Josie felt good after the interview. If she were successful, she would work at a small, privately owned language school in a small Spanish town close to Valencia. She could finally live her dream of being close to the sea. The interviewer told her they'd be in touch by the end of the week. It was only Monday. Josie knew it would be a long week. She tried to think positively and imagined herself at the school. It felt right. She drew up a budget and a plan. The role was initially for a year. That was ideal for Josie to decide if she liked it and whether the school liked her or not. She looked into visas and worked out what she needed to prepare and when. On Wednesday, she was meeting her old school friends for lunch. As usual, their questions about her lifestyle flowed. Why don't you just get a normal job? And why don't you buy a little flat? There's one for sale on my road. Josie went to the toilet and took a few deep breaths to calm her composure. Maybe she should just tell them that the lives they had chosen to lead were not what she wanted. She liked moving around and exploring. She loved teaching English and learning languages. She liked to be spontaneous. She decided against it and went back to the lunch. As she did, her phone started ringing. It was an international number. Josie paused for a moment, assuming it was a call centre. She was going to reject the call. Then she realised it might be the job. She went outside and answered. It was good news. The head teacher didn't want to wait until Friday. They knew they wanted her. They offered her a provisional start date in 6 weeks, and they would help her with finding accommodation and any paperwork she needed. Josie was overjoyed. She had to sit on a wall in the beer garden and compose herself. It was really happening. She was about to spend the next 12 months living and working close to Valencia. She quickly called her parents and told them the news. They were happy and sad. They'd miss her, but they knew this was the best thing for her. Then she walked back into the pub. "You've been ages," her friend exclaimed. "We thought you'd fallen down the loo." Josie smiled. She wanted to tell them, but wasn't sure if she could be bothered with their response. It could go one of two ways. They could be overjoyed, or they would be bitter somehow. She decided to be honest. "Well, I just got a phone call, actually. I've been offered a brilliant opportunity to teach English in Spain, so I'll be moving in 6 weeks. Her friends looked stunned. They congratulated her, but it felt cold somehow. They were happy for her, but they found it hard to relate to anything she wanted to do. They were content with their suburban lives, and she was happy with hers. They had become opposites, and Josie realised she needed to embrace that. Her friends weren't there to please. They were there to be just that, her friends. In the run-up to Josie leaving, she had lots of goodbye parties. The day before she left, she received a package from her school friends. They had put together lots of things that they knew she loved and that reminded them of her. They also wrote little cards, and she was overcome by emotion. They were encouraging and kind, and one admitted that they couldn't relate to her choices, but nevertheless they were still proud of what she did and what she had accomplished. Josie realised that they had overcome a barrier. As people grow older, they do grow apart and have different lives. They just had to learn to accept that everyone is unique and has a special perspective on what they want from life. Josie packed the cards. She decided she would proudly display them in her new flat. One of her school friends had already booked to see her in the summer. She said she needed more time for herself to do the things she enjoyed, like travelling. Maybe Josie was rubbing off on them after all. Do you still keep in touch with your school friends? Tell us in the comments below. We hope you enjoyed this lovely English story. Thank you for stopping by. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. See you soon.